What if the most dangerous knowledge in the world was never classified? What if it was published, peer-reviewed, and sitting on a library shelf, just waiting for someone to read it? There's a room in Washington, D.C., that millions of tourists walk through every single year. They take pictures of the ceiling. They read the bronze plaques. They take the guided tour. They leave having seen everything, but they've understood almost none of it. And that is not an accident. The United States Capitol building was designed by men who belonged to Masonic lodges, Hermetic orders, and Rosicrucian traditions. These groups operated on a very specific premise, that you could embed symbolic language into architecture in a way that would act on the mind of anyone who saw it, without them ever needing to consciously know what was happening. The effect didn't require awareness. It just required exposure. This is where applied occult knowledge in modern life really begins. It's not in secret rituals behind locked doors. It's in the buildings you walk through every day. It's in the seals on the documents you sign. It's in the way a room is laid out, telling your nervous system, before your mind even forms a single thought, who holds the authority and who doesn't. But here's what almost no one notices. The men who designed these spaces didn't see it as manipulation. They saw it as architecture, and that distinction reveals something incredibly important about how hidden power operates in plain sight, across every era of history. The most effective symbolic systems are the ones whose creators genuinely believe they are simply building something beautiful. Their intent becomes irrelevant. The mechanism just keeps on working. The United States was founded on a tension that has never been resolved. On one hand, the Enlightenment promised that knowledge, once withheld by traditional authority, could be set free through reason and democratic access. But on the other hand, the founding generation simultaneously embedded that exact same traditional, symbolic grammar into every institution they created. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was a strategy. A population that believes it has total freedom of information would never think to ask what the symbols on its currency are actually encoding. A population that trusts the transparency of its institutions would never examine what those institutions were built to communicate on a level that operates beneath language. Ancient symbols, with a measurable influence on our behavior, don't require believers. They just require repeated exposure. And for 2.5 centuries, every person born in this country has had daily, repeated exposure to America's founding symbolic vocabulary. If this kind of investigation speaks to you, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. So, how was The Science of Symbolic Control published for everyone to see, and then just ignored? In 1928, a man named Edward Bernays published a book called Propaganda. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he had spent the last decade applying his uncle's theories about the unconscious mind to the behavior of mass populations. His book described, in plain and direct language, exactly how symbols, images, and emotional associations could be used to direct human behavior without the people being directed ever realizing it was happening. This book was not classified. It wasn't suppressed. It was available in any library in America, but almost no one read it carefully enough to truly understand what was being described. This is the pattern that runs through the real history of so-called forbidden knowledge. The information was never hidden from the public in some grand conspiracy. It was published, presented, and discussed openly by its practitioners. It was just rendered invisible by the huge gap between the technical language it was written in and the everyday experience of the people whose behavior it was designed to shape. And this is where it gets really unsettling. Bernays wasn't operating alone. He was just applying a systematic insight that architects, priests, and political theorists had been using for centuries under different names. What Bernays contributed was the ability to translate that ancient insight for industrial-scale application. He called it the engineering of consent. He said this openly. He said it in public. He said it in print. The American advertising industry that grew out of his work embedded this symbolic influence into every product campaign, every political message, and every public relations strategy for the next century. The practitioners understood exactly what they were doing. The academic literature documenting it was vast and accessible, but none of it broke through into public consciousness with enough clarity to generate any meaningful resistance. So you see, Cain's secrets decoded through pattern recognition aren't always ancient. Sometimes they are just a century old and sitting in a university library with the call number on the spine. The behavioral psychology embedded in the digital platforms we use every day follows the exact same structure. The researchers who developed persuasive technology documented their methods in academic papers, gave keynote presentations at industry conferences, and published books describing the principles with complete transparency. The information was always there. The framework to connect it to our own lived experience was just never provided. Drop a comment if this has ever crossed your mind. You might be more aware than you think. Now, let's talk about why the algorithm is the most honest ritual system ever built. Every ritual system in human history was designed to produce a specific internal state in its participants. Think about it. The Egyptian mystery schools used architecture, sound, and symbolic progression through different stages of initiation to produce states of controlled revelation. Medieval cathedral builders used proportion, light, and geometry to induce specific emotional responses in their congregations. Shamanic traditions all over the world used rhythm, repetition, and symbolic environments to alter consciousness in ways that served the group. None of these systems hid what they were doing from their designers. They only concealed it from their subjects. The digital platform is simply the most transparent version of this ancient structure ever built, because its designers published the entire mechanism. B.J. Foggy's Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford produced research throughout the 2000s documenting exactly how digital interfaces could be designed to trigger behavioral responses, build habits, and sustain our engagement without us ever consciously choosing to engage. His students went on to build some of the most widely used applications in human history. The research was never classified. The lab published openly. The methodology was taught in university courses. This is where the pattern breaks wide open. Ancient magic, when you reframe it through the lens of modern psychology, is not a metaphor. The variable reward schedule that drives social media engagement, that constant checking for likes and notifications, is structurally identical to the oracular consultation systems of ancient mystery traditions. The person seeking answers never knew if the ritual would produce a response, which made every single attempt feel necessary, and every response that did come feel overwhelming. The mechanism is the same, only the vocabulary has changed. The effect on human behavior has not. How belief systems shape our perception without our awareness is the central subject of every esoteric tradition that survived long enough to be studied. Their initiatory systems weren't teaching supernatural abilities. They were teaching the observer to notice the mechanism that was already operating on them. And in noticing it, they could create a small but decisive space between the stimulus and their response. The algorithm doesn't need you to believe in it. It just needs your attention, and it has been engineered, with documented precision, to secure that attention before you've even decided whether you want to give it. That sequence is not an accident. It is the entire design. If this is shifting something for you, the like button tells the algorithm that this conversation matters. It helps keep this kind of content alive. Thanks for watching. Have you ever wondered about forbidden knowledge? What if it's not some ancient, hidden text, but something hiding in plain sight? What if it's simply pattern recognition on a massive scale? This is a tough puzzle to solve because there's no grand architect, no secret committee deciding which symbols go where. The symbolic systems that shape how we behave don't need a conspiracy, because they don't need intention. They just need structures that get predictable results, which are then copied, refined, and passed on by people who might not even understand why they work. This is why this invisible control is so hard to spot and so easy to dismiss. The person who designs that notification that shatters your focus at just the right moment might have never heard of esoteric architecture or ritual structure. They just learned from someone who learned from someone else, in a long line of applied behavioral science that goes back further than any of them realize. Think about the Freemasons, who heavily influenced American institutional symbols. They understood this principle perfectly. Preserving their symbolic language across generations didn't require every member to grasp the deep metaphysical system behind it all. It just required them to reproduce the forms accurately. The power wasn't in the understanding, it was stored in the structure itself. And here's the kicker. It wasn't a secret. It was just transmitted in a language most people couldn't read. The hidden meaning in everyday symbols and rituals isn't there because someone deliberately hid it. It's invisible because the ability to read this symbolic grammar was never part of our standard education. In fact, that skill was systematically pushed aside right when it became most useful to those who kept it. This shift is documented history. The move away from classical education, which included symbolic logic, rhetoric, and studying historical persuasion, to an industrial model designed to create workers, not critical thinkers, happened in a specific, traceable period. The policy arguments are on public record. The names of the people who pushed for it are in the archives. So, the knowledge was never truly forbidden. The literacy needed to read it was just made uncommon. The result is basically the same as suppression, but without all the effort. So how does becoming consciously aware of these symbols change the way you make decisions? This is where it gets really interesting. Conscious witchcraft, when you strip away all the spooky associations, describes something very precise and verifiable. It's the deliberate practice of becoming aware of the symbolic environment around you, combined with the developed ability to choose your response, rather than just reacting automatically. And this isn't mystical, it's neurological. Your nervous system processes symbolic input before your conscious mind even gets a chance to think. A symbol that you've learned to associate with authority, or desire, or a threat, creates a real, measurable physical response in your body before you've even formed a single thought about it. This is how conditioned responses are built. It's the same mechanism that every ritual system in history has used, from ancient temples to your smartphone's notification screen. But here's the part most people miss. Occult awareness, applied to your daily life, doesn't mean you have to reject the symbolic world. It means you develop that tiny fraction of a second of recognition that separates an automatic reaction from a chosen response. That fraction of a second isn't a small thing. It's everything. It is the entire difference between being controlled by symbols you can't read and encountering those same symbols, noticing the reaction they trigger in you, and keeping the power to decide what to do next. The esoteric traditions that survived long enough for us to study them all focused on the specific skill as their main practical teaching. It wasn't about supernatural powers or divine revelations. It was about the trained ability to see the mechanism working on you clearly enough to put a deliberate pause between the stimulus and your response. Hidden meaning in everyday symbols isn't just an academic topic. It's a perceptual skill. And like any skill, it develops through practice, not just by gathering information. Information without practice gives you awareness, but no agency. You might understand the system intellectually, but you'll still react to it automatically. The symbolic architecture all around you hasn't changed. But what can change is your ability to read it. If this opens something in you, subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell so you don't miss the next investigation. And tell me in the comments, what part of this are you still thinking about? Thanks for watching.